Welcome, everyone, to Authors Bantering, where two writers discuss current topics surrounding the writing community. Today, I'm here with author Ian M. Rogers. So, for today's topic, we're going to be going over traditional versus self-publishing, both kind of like the traditional, ideas about the big differences between them, and a bit more nuance surrounding it. What I will say right off the bat, and just to I guess examine this more from like a bigger perspective, because we'll go into the minor differences, like the technical differences. But when I was going for my MFA, someone had said very appropriately the big difference between self-publishing and traditional publishing, which is, in a very broad context, traditional publishing is where the jobs are, self-publishing is where the money is. And what they were referring to is that you can, generally speaking, make more money if you go the self-publishing route off just the books. If that's your goal, if that's what you want to do, that's where a lot of the income can come in. But if you're looking at other things, if you're looking to potentially, become like maybe a professional editor, if you're looking to work at universities, what have you, traditional publishing is what is basically a better avenue for that. It's going to give you more credentials, because there is kind of a credentialing and sort of a sort of prestige thing that still exists in the writing field. And that's what you need to usually get into these kind of positions. And I'm glad, because I have, yeah.
I was going to say that's a really important distinction. I think when you say get jobs, I think especially for academic jobs where, the people who are vying for professorships, creative writing, teaching jobs, kind of that literary world, that old school self-publishing, I think is just going to be frowned upon, might be strong of a word, but they're not going to take you seriously if you have self-published. The idea that like some editor for some press, big or small, cared enough about your work to sign it, put it on there, and that's going to be the equivalent of a peer pay you, of course.
Yeah.
That's going to be the equivalent of like a peer review in the sciences or in other kinds of fields. The idea that they took you seriously, so it gives you some street cred in there. And so even though you might not be making as much money, especially if you're publishing with a small press, with something like that, a lot of those authors, they don't make any money from the books, but the credibility that the books give them allows them to get the higher paying professor jobs, the creative writing teaching jobs, the other types of jobs in there. Even so with editing and somewhat, I think it plays into it as well.
Exactly. And I'm glad I have you here, because obviously you've been traditionally published. So that's your route. I'm going, I guess for the time being, we're actually going more the self-published route now this year. And it's good to get your perspective on this, because it's never talked about. I don't think in any video I've ever seen on YouTube where people talk about the difference between traditional and self-publishing, they ever discuss things kind of like that, right? Like prestige, like the idea of potentially getting jobs and working in the writing field, about kind of careerism, right? It's something that's not necessarily talked about a whole lot. I think in part because most writers that are looking to become authors are not necessarily looking at that avenue. I don't know how many people want to become academics and all that stuff. I'm not sure.
Well, some of them do. I think the ones who do, or maybe the ones that the are either afraid or think that the writing that they're interested in doing is not going to make them any money, or is not going to get them the sales they need to support the kind of lifestyle that they want. And so in that sense, getting the professor job, the tenure track job, is their way of supporting the lifestyle that they want, the way of getting that, livable salary, or the, middle class income or whatever. They really want to write, but the professor job is kind of the path to that. But there's also another kind of writer, I think, that maybe is more interested in academia, more interested in teaching, more interested in that kind of life primarily. And writing is just kind of the way that they get there. They really want to teach creative writing, but I guess I got to write some books too to get that happen. Get that credibility. So I think both of those kinds are pretty common in the academic world.
It is in the academic world, and I was talking more about like the YouTube world, right? Where people like just go on YouTube and they're like, "Hey, how to write a book," or "What's the difference between this?" Right? I don't know how many people are necessarily thinking of going to that pathway, which is good that we're bringing it up, because I think there maybe are some people that are thinking maybe thinking more long term about their careers and like, what can I do with this? And it's good to keep that in mind as well, to play into it. But now, if we go back to the bare bones, right, this the rigid structure here, feel free to add on anything I'm about to say. But the main difference between traditional and self-publishing, obviously, in terms of like the logistics, is traditional publishing, you're basically doing just the writing itself, right? So the cover design, the later edits, some of the marketing, all that's handled basically by your publisher, right? And so with that, the trade-off is that there's a lot more hurdles to go through. You have to find the agent, you have to get the publishing deal. There's a lot more hurdles, it's a lot longer of a process. But for the most part, you can focus just on the craft of writing, at least, as opposed to self-publishing, where you have to do everything yourself, right? Or hire freelancers to do it for you: the editing, book cover design, the sort of copy. What's it called? Copywriting, not copywriting.
Copy editing,
Copy editing. Yeah, yeah.
the
Where you basically set
layout,
exactly the
all
layout
these
design.
things
Yes.
that some authors don't think of. I
Yep.
think it's more well known now for people to understand all these different elements.
Mm-hmm.
They don't think that more than just a cover, so to speak. But it's the idea that if you're going to self-publish, you're either on the hook for one, the time to learn all of these elements, because I think it is possible to do all or most of them
Mm-hmm.
yourself, or two, you're on the hook for the money of paying the cover designer, paying the layout person, paying the editor, paying the proofreader, and
Yep.
all these kind of different steps. Or if you just do it, in a very like slipshod kind of way, you just kind of throw it out there. You're not on the
Exactly.
hook for anything. The kind of person who just wants to put their work out there. I just want it
Yeah.
to be seen, put it out in the ether, and whatever happens, happens. I wrote it, there it is.
Bingo. Exactly. You're right. And that's the main difference is there. And obviously the trade-off is that there's less hoops to jump through and you keep more of your revenue, right? As opposed to, and you can go into a second, basically, like what you make as far as royalties goes and how the book contract works. Because I want you to go over that more than, because you know more about it than
No,
I do.
that
But with self-publishing, obviously, I think it's typically, I think you keep about like, usually if you look at like Amazon Kindle and stuff, basically it's like, I think what it's like 70% usually you can keep or so of the royalties,
it,
as
yeah, it
opposed
depends. It
to,
depends on the price of the book. It
yeah,
depends on, it depends on the platform and so on. But you're looking at keeping, exponentially more. And so if you
yeah,
have a good selling book, it's the potential that not only are you going to make more money, but it could also pay for the cost of the editor, the cost of the cover
yeah.
designer, the cost of, other things, because you're going to be making so much more, three, four times more per book.
Exactly. Exactly. Now, for you though, so on the traditional side of things, as far as let's get into the money, right? So as far as the money, book contracts. So how do you make your money in it? Like as far as like advances in royalties, and then
So
what does the payout usually look like for
no,
at least in your
that's a
experience?
really good question. So I'm with a small press, so there's no advance. So if I don't
Okay.
sell books, that's it. The
Okay.
advantage to doing that is that I'm not on the hook for any advance. It's like the
Fair.
publisher is taking a very, very small risk on my book. They're not in
Gotcha.
it for 5, 10, 30, $100,000 like some of these authors are.
Fair.
The those authors, sometimes you can get in trouble where it's, oh, I got $100,000 advance, but I only sold, 200 copies. Oh, the publisher just lost a lot of money. You have a blacklist on you right there.
Yes.
So I'm not in it for that. So I do get a royalty check. Mine comes 4 times a year with my press. That's the way they do it with Vine Leaves Press.
Okay.
And so I do make royalties from that. Most of the money that I made from my book, however, I made from distributing it myself, which is something that doesn't
Hmm.
get talked about as much. So with Vine Leaves Press, I was actually allowed to order author copies at a discount, and then I was allowed to do whatever I wanted them.
Okay.
Give them to friends, use them for promotion, or I could distribute them myself, sell
Yep.
them. Which I was able to do, through a pre-order, through my website. People could order through a web store that was very easy to set up. And so I was able to charge full price for something that I had paid much less for. And so
Mhm.
most of the money that, I made on that novel came from that pre-order, actually. I was able to one, determine how many copies to order from there, but then also make more per book. And of course people can still buy it through the usual channels and through local bookstores and things like that around here, but most of the actual income, like folding money, came from that pre-order.
Did it? Okay. And you brought a good point, which is with that, regardless of what you do, so self-publishing or traditional, you are going to basically be in charge of the marketing pretty much yourself here. Like, so you've also been traditional, but I imagine almost most of the marketing has been done on your end, at least the majority of
Yes,
it.
that's a really good point, actually. So the press, of course, did some. They are good with making videos and a lot of graphics.
Okay.
The press designed me a bookmark and Twitter backgrounds and all that kind of stuff. They ran videos. They put my book on mailing lists and things like that.
Awesome.
And so
Okay.
they did some really really good steps. I think small presses are going to vary greatly in how much promotion they do. I see some where it's like, yep, we do zero. It's all on you. Or some that, are able to do way more as far as getting reviews and,
Mm-hmm.
networking and things like that. So small presses run the gamut. Big five traditional presses, generally they're going to have more muscle to put behind a book, as certainly as as far as getting it out there, traditional bookstores and so on, the major chains and so on. But at the end of the day, I think the author's going to be on the hook for a lot. And when I say on the hook, I mean responsible, expected, responsible for doing a lot. um, more than a lot of authors think, I think is probably the consensus. I think a lot of authors have this, dream, maybe from an earlier era, or maybe it never existed at all, that like, well, I can write the manuscript, brush my hands off, and then the publisher will take care of everything.
Yeah,
It's like, sorry, if even if it did work that way back in the day, which I'm not sure it did, it definitely doesn't work this way now. It's expected to be more of a symbiotic relationship.
it
The
is.
traditional publisher does some, the author does some as well. I think they just differ on, what percentage, kind of that is.
Absolutely. No, I think you're right. And it's important you pointed out, though, that they are going to do some marketing for you. Because
Yes.
when I look at these other videos, they always talk about how, regardless, you got to do most of the marketing yourself. They never really say what they actually do. And I think it tends to maybe misinterpret the advantages of getting a traditional publisher. Because if you're watching that video and you go, well, if they're not going to do much marketing at all for me anyways, then I might as well self-publish because I'm doing the marketing myself and just keep most of the money. But you understand, there is an element of them supporting it. They are going to support you to a degree. So it's not like you're completely on your own. And that small degree, you may not think it's a lot, that can be huge. Like having, if you're not very good with like designing your own, marketing tools, it can be good to have someone put out a promotional video to do a Twitter, basically markup for you, to
Yeah.
do, basically different designs of like promotional materials. It can be very, very helpful. And so
Yes.
it's good to recognize that side of it too.
Especially for an author who's just starting out. Like if you're starting off at zero or with very minimal platform,
Yep.
minimal experience putting your work out there, if you're not sure, it can be really, really scary. Like it's a jungle out there. Like there's a
A lot of
lot to
wolves
be
at the
done. It's
doors.
really confusing. You don't know what to
Yeah.
focus on or like what's going to be effective. And you try stuff, but there's a million people doing it, and so on and so on. Just having that bit of guidance from a traditional press, small or large, can be huge. Like you hit
Yeah.
the ground running in that respect. It's like it automatically it starts you off at a little higher of a platform, and maybe it's not the highest platform depending on your press, but it's still something. It's still something for a first time author.
Absolutely. No, and it's excellent to have that, and you have to factor those things in when you make this decision. Now, it cannot be something that can be so rash or basically based around just the basic mechanics of it, right?
Yes.
Even someone who looks at the process and just like, yeah, I don't want to wait, like 2-3 years to get my, from the time I finish my book to get it maybe even into print. There are bigger things to consider beyond that. And I think to the degree to which you can kind of look ahead and forecast and see what you want to do, the better. If
That's a really good point, actually. I think a lot of people talk about the like, oh, I don't want to wait 2 years. I want it now or next
yeah,
month or whatever. I think that's probably the worst reason to self-publish.
yes,
I think that writing is a long game. I think an author career is a long game. So if you're in this for the next 40 years or whatever it is, like what's an extra two? It's not, especially
bingo.
if you're able to write the next book while you're
While you're
waiting
waiting,
for the first one to come out to kind of develop that kind of structured approach to
exactly.
get things going.
And you're exactly right. And I think that's the other thing that's really important too to keep in mind is the idea that regardless of your pathway, you have to be continually working on the next thing because, and you said this before, and I completely agree, which is like the thing that sells, regardless of which pathway, the thing that sells your first book is your second one, right? Like you want to increase sales in your first
Yes.
book, write a second one because that one's going to catch fire and they're going to go back to your old catalog and having that catalog built up regardless of that pathway.
Yes, I think that's really, really important. It's this idea that you're establishing yourself as an author, you're investing in your career, and it's not just about one book or the book or this book or whatever it is. It's about you as an author who's able to continuously produce material that people are going to want to read and get excited about. And I think
Bingo.
that's what it means to build a career versus just oh, I wrote this book, I'm really proud of it, I need to get it out in the world. And there's a lot of people who can do one book,
Mm-hmm.
one book that they were maybe really invested in from when they were a kid or their first idea, or they started it so they want to finish it or whatever. I think in a lot of ways the real test is producing a second book, is
Yes.
overcoming that and saying, okay, I finished the first book, now what? Now
Mm-hmm.
what's the next? I think that's a part where a lot of people either struggle or they can't even start at all because it's just too overwhelming for them.
Exactly. And something I wanted to ask you before we wrap this up, and because I think it's a question that I had before I decided to go the self-publishing route, and I want to get your opinion on it. And I bet that people that are going to be in the audience that are going to be listening to this that are probably thinking the same thing, which is looking at self-publishing as potentially like a backup option, right? When should someone consider that? Like after how many rejections should someone consider going that pathway? I've had my own answer for this, but I want to get yours first.
That's a
Or
really,
should
really
they
good
not? I
question.
mean, you can all say
Um,
no, trunk the novel and wait and try to get trunk 5 novels and hope the sixth one gets picked up.
No, I
It's
think that's a really, really good
yeah,
question. I think one, you should never put a number on it because different types of novels are going to have different outlets, different agents, different small presses that are
okay,
going to be interested in them. I think every author should reach a point where they're saying, okay, how badly do I want to be traditional published? And then what kind of venues am I finding to apply to?
yeah,
If you're finding venues every other day and it's easy for you to apply, maybe you should apply to a very, very large number. But if you have a very niche project where it's not going to fit a lot of places
yep,
and you're looking for places or people that are really, really niche
yep,
and you're not finding those, and maybe it's kind of a pain for you to look for those all the time,
mm-hmm.
then maybe it's not worth the struggle of searching around in the weeds for that.
Okay,
Maybe you should be self-publishing and making your own niche. And so I think
yeah,
every author should reach a point where the investment return ratio, isn't as favorable. And so then they would then make the decision themselves. Okay, I'm not finding what I'm looking for within the traditional publishing route. Then I'm gonna self. I'm gonna
yeah.
go this alone.
Gotcha. And I think that's a good idea too. Is the idea of recognizing the fact that some works have broader appeal versus other ones that have more niche appeal. And if you do have a very niche story, look at smaller presses versus the large ones. Because if you're getting a lot of rejections because it's just a niche project, that's got to be expected. You have to kind of know going in that you're going to get a lot of rejections if you're looking at more traditional agents versus smaller presses and vice versa. If you write something that's very broad, look at agents, look at like bigger publishers first, then look at small presses afterwards if you still want to go traditional.
Yes.
And now with that, if you get rejected both ways, let's say you've gotten rejected, say 100 rejections for the same story. Are you the kind of person where you would say, all right, I'm going to trunk it and just write another one basically, and then hope maybe someday someone picks up that story later on?
It's a really good question, actually. I mean, my first novel is a drawer novel at this point.
Yeah.
I sent it out to agents and then to small presses, and eventually reached a point where I was working on a new project. I thought, okay, I love this novel. This novel's great, but I had realized that maybe it was just too niche.
Yep.
Maybe it was really, really. The reason people weren't interested in it is because it was a novel about the expatriate life in Japan, and again, that was so narrow. And I thought, okay, do I want to self-publish this or do I want to leave it in the drawer? As far as self-publishing and doing all of that work, and then putting that out there, I thought, okay, it didn't feel worth it to me because I was already invested in my new project
Mm-hmm.
and wanted to see that through.
Okay.
Maybe if the new project hadn't worked out, I would have come back to that first novel. But for me, I was looking to invest my energies in a new direction instead
Yep.
of dwelling on the past, so to speak. And I'm very happy with that decision. I love that novel. Maybe something will happen to it someday. I was happy to publish a small form of it as a short story, as a chapbook.
Oh, okay.
That was really, really cool. So part of the ideas and the characters exist in that form, which was really, really cool and fulfilling. But I personally did not want to invest the time, energy, and money on this drawer novel when I already had a new project.
Gotcha. Okay, so you were comfortable trunking it, and before I kind of go over mine, you've hit, I think, the exact point which I'm trying to make, which is you trunked yours because of the novel itself as far as the content, right? It was not very, very broad appeal. It was not something that many people would probably want to take a risk on as far as publishing it goes. You did not trunk it, and you did not consider publishing it or trunking it basically because the writing was terrible. And it's a very
No,
important distinction, which
yeah,
is if you
yeah, that's a real. Actually, I
yes,
don't think that people don't talk about that
no, they
enough. Is
don't.
that there are some
Yes,
novels that either because of the stage the writer is at in their career, or just the way the story is set up, or in
yes,
just the way the novel's going, that the quality is not going to be there,
yep,
and that's okay. That's okay. People. Some writer wrote that novel, and they learned a lot about themselves and their process by
mm-hmm.
doing it, and that can be tremendously, tremendously valuable.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think if somebody acknowledges that and they say, okay, this isn't quite up there yet, but the next one's going to be, or the one after that's going to be. It's
Bingo.
just like a learning process in that way. I learned so much about writing from that first novel. I wouldn't trade that for anything.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing.
Yeah, and yeah, you're right, and that's what it takes. Where there is, if you, on whatever path we decide, especially if you're looking at self-publishing as the second option, is being self-aware enough to recognize if the story itself is good in terms of
Yes.
quality. You didn't trunk because you trunked your basic novel basically because it didn't have very broad appeal. For myself, I had the publisher basically, I went through the whole thing for that the 9 months, whatever it was, whatever, but that publisher where it was like potentially maybe make a couple corrections here, and we're interested in looking at it again, right? I had enough blood in the water where I recognized that okay, the story, it's as far as the quality of itself is good, it just may not be something that they can potentially market. They may not be able to find a good market for it, may be able to find a good audience for it. They may not be, they only have so many people they can take in, and this story might be good, but they can probably get a better ROI in someone else's story. That was a good recognition for me to go, okay, the story's of good quality, but they don't want to take a risk on it just because the content
Yes.
may not bring a huge audience. Are you willing to publish it yourself, recognize, be proud of the work that you've done on it and how good of quality it is, and recognize that maybe you won't sell a bunch of copies because maybe it doesn't have this very broad appeal? And I said yes. Again, this was a decision based upon more appeal and more of the business decision behind choosing to choose a novel over another. Not that I got 100 rejections and they all said my writing was terrible and I didn't hear
Yeah.
back at all. And
Yeah.
I'm going to show them because I want the story out there. So I'm going to publish this story, which I
Yeah.
kind of know deep down isn't particularly good. It's not very well written. I'm only in my first, second, third year of writing, and but hey, screw it. I'm just going to get it out anyways. And if whatever. That's a big distinction there on the motivations and understanding the big decisions as to why you should do it. And I think there's a mature aspect of going in with the former example rather than the latter, where you're just doing it just for the sake of everyone hates it, they think it sucks, and maybe it does, but screw it, I'm going to get it out anyways. That for me is a bit. I'll never begrudge someone for doing that because you put the effort in to write the story, but it does strike me as something that's a little bit less wise, a little bit less mature than taking a step back from, sort of your egoic standpoint of you being the writer, looking at it from the outside and going, okay, maybe I'm not there yet, but I can be soon enough. Let's trunk this for right now. Maybe I come back. Maybe I revise it in a couple of years. Maybe it has some appeal then.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's very well said.
Mm-hmm.
If we're going to sum this up, one piece of advice I would give to any writer who is weighing this kind of decision, and who is, especially if they haven't published a book yet, I would say look at where you want your career to go, and
Okay.
how publishing this book, either traditional or self, will potentially get you there or get you on the road to being there. And if the answer is okay, doing this, publishing this book in this way is going to get me to a place I want to go, then do it. But if you're not sure that putting the book out there as a self-published book is going to get you where you want to go,
Yep.
maybe you should be focusing your time, your energy, and honestly your money in a different way.
Absolutely. I think you're right. And that's exactly it. Thinking ahead, looking ahead, not thinking of this as just a one off, but thinking of it yourself as a writer with a full career ahead of you and how you want that to look. Not just, I get the story, I love the story, it has to be read by the world. Oh my God, I got to get it out. But thinking more broad. Yes. Very good. So I really think we covered kind of all the bases here. And again, these are topics that in areas surrounding considerations for each pathway that I don't see talked about too much. So if you all enjoyed this video, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. We post new videos every Monday. And lastly, as I said in the prior video, we want this to be a resource for you. So if there's a certain writing topic or idea that you like discussed on this channel, leave in the comments and maybe we'll address it. All right.
Send us your questions. We'll totally talk about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally. Yeah, we're not going to blow you off. But with that, I'm going to sign off. This is Josh Bresslin. This is Ian Rogers, and we will see you next week.
Take it easy.